Hi folks, just a heads up, the snail might buff the loadouts on this jet at some point in the future. For now, it's a lot of mights and maybes, but just something to keep in mind. During the late 1950s, Australia was looking ahead to the replacement of their English Electric Canberra bombers. Even though the jets had only recently entered service, they understood it would take a while to get something new, and they figured that by the time a replacement was ready, the Canberras would be totally obsolete. And they were right. However, changes in government priorities and disagreements over regional threats resulted in some flip-flopping on a replacement project. After a lot of waffling over the different options, they settled on an American project called TFX that was still in development at the time, and contracts were initially signed in 1964. The TFX project, by now named the F-111, ended up having a lot of delays, and the Australian requirements led to a new sub-variant of the jet which caused even more delays. The F-111C finally entered regular service with the Royal Australian Air Force in 1973, and by that point, the growing costs of the program and constant delays ended up causing a few political scandals in Australia. But the good news was, once it got into service, the F-111C itself was a very solid aircraft. The C model was specifically built for Australia, and featured slightly longer wings, some differences in the electronics, and new landing gear. Over the years, the Australian 111s were upgraded several times. The jets eventually got new avionics and combat computers, compatibility with the PAVE-TAC targeting pod, new radar sets, and significantly upgraded navigation systems. Although the F-111C never saw actual combat, the recon version was used over East Timor in 1999, but there was one unusual strike mission they performed. In 2003, a North Korean cargo ship named the Pong-Su was confiscated after being caught red-handed smuggling heroin into Australia. The Australian government decided to use it for target practice for the military, and in 2006 the ship was sunk by F-111Cs delivering Paveway 2 laser-guided bombs. All in all, the C-Model 111s had a very successful service life in Australia until finally being phased out of service in the late 2000s. What we get in War Thunder is the F-111C Aardvark, a strike aircraft in Rank 7 of the British tech tree at battle rating 11.7. The jet, unsurprisingly, features a full ballistics computer, gets an EEGS, and has an AN/ALR 2002 radar warning receiver. This is a direction-based unit, and it includes a missile approach warning system. But it eats through your countermeasures really fast, so I generally suggest turning that off. The radar is the AN/APQ-159, which in the game is a fairly basic I-band set with relatively short range, but it's got both BVR and ACM targeting, however, no advanced modes of any kind. For loadouts, the jet can take either a cannon or a PAVE-TAC targeting pod as an internal centerline hardpoint option, along with missiles, dumb bombs, and laser-guided bombs out on 4 wing hardpoints. The selection of weapons isn't as wide as you might expect in Rank 7, but it can still get the job done, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, it may get buffed at some point. The air-to-air missile you get is the AIM-9L, an all-aspect version of the Sidewinder, with 30 Gs of pull and pretty good tracking for this BR range. This is a totally credible weapon for air combat. It also gets 3 different types of laser-guided bombs in different sizes. My preference, as always, is the GBU-24, not just because it's the largest, but because it has inertial guidance, and it can stay on track through brief losses and laser locks. Lastly, if you're not using any LGBs, you can swap out the PAVE-TAC pod for an M61A1 Vulcan cannon. This thing has a strong rate of fire and a fairly good set of ammo belts, along with 2,000 rounds of ammunition. In terms of its flight performance, the F-111C is kind of a hot rod. The defining characteristic of this jet is just speed. It's one of the fastest planes in the entire game, and you can push it past Mach 1.3 down at ground level depending on your weapon loadout. The acceleration is only average early in a match since you'll be carrying a lot of fuel weight, but the acceleration never really drops off. Your high top speed allows you to outrun, or run down, just about any jet you can face, including MiG-23s, which are themselves known for their speed. The agility and maneuverability are generally pretty average. The normal variable geometry caveats apply that you want to unsweep the wings for turning performance and throw them back for speed. The jet has combat flaps that can actually make a pretty good impact on turn rate when the wings are unswept, but there's a catch to all this. The energy retention is awful. The F-111 is a heavy jet, and you're going to lose an enormous amount of speed if you slow down, put the wings forward, and throw it into a turn rate fight. All this adds up to a slightly below average dogfight experience, but the plane isn't a whale and it can credibly defend itself in air combat. Now, it's important to remember something basic here. Weight. The F-111 is already heavy, and when you add in its huge fuel load and external weapons, the performance ends up suffering significantly. The silver lining to this is that the engines are incredibly thirsty, and with the afterburner going, it can chug through almost an hour of fuel in just a few minutes. Once you get this jet, I strongly suggest flying it out a couple of times into a custom battle or something, just to get a feel for the fuel burn before deciding how much gas you want to take out into live matches based on your own playstyle. Taking this jet out into air battles can be really fun, but sometimes underwhelming. As I mentioned at the start, the Snail may be expanding the weapon load at some point, but for now, you only get 4 hardpoints worth of weapons. You can take out 2 bases if you take the smaller sized bombs, or you can focus on a column or 2 of AI ground units, but you don't really have enough weapon load to do much more than that. For now, anyway. If you fly this out as a fighter, you can, but keep your expectations realistic. The 9L is a good missile, but it can still be flared off without a whole lot of fuss, and the mediocre dogfight performance means that you probably want to fly this more like an interceptor, doing high-speed passes through the battle without getting sucked into it. The good news is that if you do get sucked into dogfighting, the EEGS and the enormous supply of cannon ammo actually makes this a credible threat in a gunfight, since you can spray and pray an enormous amount of shots at your targets. Still, a reminder that this is a supersonic bomber, and air combat is a secondary function. Using the F-111C for close air support opens its potential up a bit. The laser-guided bombs are very accurate, especially the Paveway 3s with inertial tracking. The only real drawbacks are, again, the limited payload, for now, and also the targeting pod. The PaveTac targeting pod only has entry-level thermals, and if you're new to using these kind of pods, it might take you some practice before you can reliably find targets. It does have an auto-tracker though, which makes things a little easier. One last thing I want to mention about close air support with this jet, it's at BR 11.7 and can go up against some really modern SPAA systems, and is at the mercy of the cloud cover meta. Something you might want to practice are treetop level high-speed bombing runs using the targeting pod and snake eye bombs. It's risky, but when it works, it's pretty frickin' epic. Visually, the 111C looks just as badass as the other 111s. The paint jobs are mostly the dark gray with some tail fin artwork, but generally the dark paint jobs look really menacing, and it's got a lot of really fine details. I'm a huge fan of having this jet up on my screen. Landing can be easy depending on weight. If you run a short sortie and you land with like 40 minutes of fuel left, just remember the low speed performance is going to suffer, and maybe come in a little faster than normal. Otherwise, just throw the wings forward and hit the air brake. No drag chute, but it's generally simple to land. The cockpit has heavily obstructed views in most directions, and the important instruments are spread out a bit. This is a bomber, and while it's still fun to fly in VR, dogfighting is a significant challenge. Very situational experience with the headset. To close out on the F-111C. This jet is very fast. It gets a targeting pod and strong laser-guided bombs, has tons of cannon ammo, and great defensive systems. However, its payload is limited overall, for now anyway, and it's barely average in a dogfight. The final verdict on the F-111C is that this jet is a lot of fun to fly, but the limited payload kind of puts a pretty low cap on the number of points you can get per sortie. If the snail makes good on buffing its loadouts, that issue will basically vanish, but overall it's still a great addition to the UK tech tree, even without any more loadouts. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.